Hello, hello. Hope everyone's doing great today. Thank you all for joining. I'm Anne. I think we'll give it just a couple more minutes while people join and take part in the webinar here, talking about modern access control in the public sector. We haven't even started yet, and already my dog is disturbing the peace back here. So hopefully she'll stay quiet. All right. Well, it is 1 o'clock on the dot. Let's go ahead and get started. We'll do some introductions and some housekeeping, and then we can dive in. Oh my goodness. I don't know if you guys can hear my dog in the background.
It's the joy and
Sadie,
happiness of live events.
I know she's not yet ready for prime time. This is literally the first time that she has barked the entire day, and she decides to do it during our live webinar. But she is very cute, so you can probably see her running around in the background. But again, my name is Ann Cutler. I'm the Vice President of Global Communications here at Keeper Security. Super excited to have this webinar today. Huge thank you to Kim Howard, who leads our public sector marketing, for pulling this all together. It's a wonderful topic. Modern access control in the public sector. It's something that we help address here at Keeper. It's something we talk about all the time here at Keeper, and just so critically important. And of course, today, what's really cool is we're bringing a CISO's perspective. So we have Shane Barney on, who is our Chief Information Security Officer at Keeper Security. Shane joined us in May and has quite the illustrious career. He spent 20 years at the Department of Homeland Security. He was CISO of U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, USCIS. He led some pretty transformative cybersecurity initiatives there, looking at prioritizing identity security, risk intelligence, operational agility, and then, of course, modernizing the agency's approach to risk management and shifting to really a more adaptive, mission-driven model. So, Shane, thank you for taking part in this today. We greatly appreciate it.
Absolutely. I'm happy to be here.
All right, before we get going, let's have Kim handle just a little bit of housekeeping, and then we'll start diving in with some questions.
Sure thing. Thank you, everyone, for joining today. And thank you, Ann and Shane. We're really excited to have both of you on today. Today's webinar is being recorded. All attendees and people who registered for the webinar will receive a link to the recording sometime early next week. Attendees will be on mute throughout the presentation. If you do have any questions as Shane and Ann are talking, we do encourage you to use the Q&A module that you'll see at the bottom of your screen. We'll try to get to questions live. If we're unable to address your specific question on the webinar today, a member of our team will reach out to you shortly afterwards. And with that, I'll hand it back to Ann.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kim. So as we dive in, we'll be hearing Shane's perspective from someone who has been a practitioner in the federal government and led major cybersecurity initiatives, and now is on the vendor side. So really kind of a unique perspective that he brings to the table. But as we talk about modern access control, of course, the first thing that comes to mind for me is privileged access management. So let's just dive in there, Shane, with why is PAM so essential in today's public sector IT environments? And, perhaps maybe just an overview of PAM as well for folks who aren't as familiar with it. I know we have a lot of our customers registered. They may be users of our enterprise password management solution or our government solution, but might not be as familiar with PAM.
Yeah, it's a great question. And you're absolutely correct. A lot of people aren't as familiar with PAM as you would hope. But I think in order to understand where PAM fits within the sort of the cybersecurity ecosystem, you have to understand it in context for identity at large. Like, what do we mean by identity? How does that factor in? Where does it factor in? If you look at like the zero trust model, like the CISO has put out, there's an identity column. Clearly, PAM fits neatly within that. But what does that mean exactly, and what does that cover? Like, what does that get you? And so for me, I've always saw PAM, Privileged Access Management, as it does several things. One, it offers controls, it offers monitoring, auditing capabilities, and also the ability to control access to the most critical assets by those with the most rights. When you look at something like SolarWinds, or you look at some of the Microsoft attacks that we've seen, when I was in government, part of what those threat actors did was compromise those privileged accounts. having very finite, very detailed controls over those accounts and what they're accessing and how they're accessing it, and being able to monitor those transactions at that level is required now. It's not even just a nice to have; it is not even optional. The modern attack surface is such that you have to have a very detailed understanding of what your privileged users are doing and what assets they're interfacing with. Without that, it's part of that identity ecosystem, but without this PAM piece in the middle, you're sort of like, yeah, okay, I know who's supposed to be here, but I don't know what they're supposed to be doing. I don't know what they're supposed to be accessing, and if they've got the right access levels, and maybe they've got too much, or maybe they don't have enough. It's hard to say. And then you also aren't monitoring what access levels are the access level sprawl, as they call it, where your administrators tend to give administrative rights to others as they go along. Not having a properly framed system to handle that leads to sort of like, the bottom basement sort of administration of your network. And then one day you turn around and you find out half of your enterprise is exposed.
And when you look at the folks who are on this call right now, who are maybe familiar with Keeper's password management product, that is still a very key component of this. You can't have the privileged access management without the password, but then also secrets management as well. So we've seen, these human identities and the risks associated with social engineering, with phishing attacks, you name it, and weak reused passwords. But then you also have the non-human identities, and those have just exploded in numbers in recent years. So why is it important to protect both of those? And then how does that kind of tie into the broader PAM platform?
Secrets management is such an interesting thing. We first deployed it when I was still with the government. We first deployed a secrets management solution. It was like 2017 or 2018. And I remember we got it deployed, got it up and running, and the development teams loved it. And I reported out, hey, to all my kind of peers in the government, hey, we've done this really cool thing. If you guys are interested, I'll demo it. And they all looked at me like I was crazy. They had no idea what I was talking about. Secrets management, what secrets? And, in government work, especially in the federal government, a lot of times when you talk secrets, they think classified. You're like, are you doing classified work now? Or what are you doing? I had to like really explain to them what we meant by secrets. And in this case, when we talk about secrets management as being a critical aspect of your identity infrastructure, what we're really getting at here is the APIs, the keys, the tokens, the service accounts. It's the database passwords that you need for RDS. It's an Oracle. It's all those sorts of things that have to be in place in order to run a modern infrastructure. What you don't want is to have those sorts of secrets hard coded into something, or worse, sitting in a text file somewhere. Usually they call the text file passwords because that hides it really well. You don't want that. You want to manage that centrally and at a core level, and you want to have good controls over that. On top of that, when something does become compromised within your enterprise, or potentially compromised due to a data leak or a breach of some sort, you also want to be able to rotate those credentials. At a drop of a hat. I have been involved. The reason we deployed a secrets management solution originally was because we had a problem and we had to go in and rotate our keys. And it literally took thousands of labor hours to do it manually because we had secrets everywhere. And so we quickly realized, hey, if we're going to do cloud and we're going to do modern development, we have to modernize the way we manage our secrets. So for me, secrets is just a critical piece of your overall identity stack. And it is a core aspect of PAM.
Absolutely. And as we all know, cybersecurity professionals have to be right 100% of the time. A cyber criminal only has to be
Fortunately,
right.
we are, of course.
Of course we are, Shane. But that's all it takes sometimes. That one weak password, that one hard-coded secret, an attacker gets in, and then without that access management in place, then suddenly they can elevate and cause some real damage. So one of the things in the public sector that is so critically important is compliance, regulations, certifications. So, when folks are evaluating vendors, when they're looking at PAM solutions, how do you evaluate certifications to ensure that you are meeting that compliance and then also readiness as well?
Well, if you've ever heard me talk publicly about compliance, you've also heard me say that compliance does not equal security. So what I mean by that is that just being compliant with something doesn't instantly mean that you've covered all your bases and you're good to go. Just have to caveat that. I'm a CISO, I have to say it. but they are
Too honest, Shane, too
very, very, I know.
honest.
They are very important though, because what compliance frameworks do, like FedRAMP and StateRAMP and NIST and ISO and some of the other ones, they provide a list of basically known risks. In other words, these are the things that we absolutely know about and need to mitigate. So when you have a product that meets FedRAMP High and or is IL5 certified, or has its encryption is rated at FIPS 141-3 or 140-3, all these sort of jargony things that we love to throw around. What you're really saying is like, listen, of the known risks, we've dealt with these. Now, really what that means is now you have a baseline. That's your baseline from which you need to operate. And then you need, as a cybersecurity professional, you need to start from that baseline and work up and go, okay, what don't we know about? What's unique to my enterprise that's going to create risk here? What supply chains should I worry about that are either interfacing with this or dependent on this? It's those sorts of questions. Having a compliance framework in place and being compliant is really critical, but it doesn't equal security. You need to do your job too, and kind of bridge the gap between the known risks and those unknown risks.
Yeah, so it's good baseline. You need to have it, but that's not all you can evaluate
And make sure that you integrate a cyber intelligence into that process. Cyber intelligence is all about, it's sort of the whimsical side of cyber. In other words, it's not the definitive, oh my goodness, we have a vulnerability. It's the potential for a vulnerability. But at the same time, it does give you a lot of direction and hints at where threat actors are going, and making sure that you integrate within, when you're dealing with sort of the unknown risk piece of this, that cyber intelligence is going to be your best friend here.
Okay. And you touched on supply chain, and I think that is so important. Third-party vendors, we're only as strong as our weakest link. So obviously looking at these certifications, using cyber intelligence, that's just as important for the third parties that we work with as well.
Correct. So, and it's important that they themselves are using it, of course, or using some aspects of it. But from a kind of a layered defense approach, supply chain is one of those things that you don't know you're got until you're got. I look at SolarWinds, which they basically inserted a library into the back end. Once it was compiled code, there was no way you were ever going to find that back door ever, unless you knew where to look for it. And then they hid in the traffic. It was the perfect supply chain hack, and it was well executed and well orchestrated. That type of an attack scenario, it really puts a lot of emphasis back on the individual enterprises to ensure that you have a very layered approach to how you do things. And that means you're managing your secrets appropriately. You're managing your privileged access. As I said earlier, in SolarWinds, they went after the administrators. That's actually whose accounts they compromised. Having a PAM solution in place, especially if you're leveraging things like just-in-time privileged access, or you're also, and especially if you're utilizing least privileged principles and practices, you're going to ensure that even if that account gets compromised, yes, they may be able to do some harm to you, but you're going to limit the dwell time a threat actor can spend there, because eventually your PAM solution is going to kick in and revoke those rights. Not only that, you're going to be monitoring the activities of that account at a very detailed level, even if it's not, even if you're not staring right at the screen, the system, it will do that. And making sure that it can pick up on the nuances that we as humans can't see. In the old days, we always talked about, you have a bell curve and you look for these big spikes and they go, oh, look, we're under attack. That's not how it works anymore. Now, the attack patterns that we're seeing are these little micro bumps on the actual bell curve itself, which are so small and so just in the minutia that there's no way a human is going to catch that.
Yeah.
A PAM solution that's running 24/7, 365 in the back end, and especially having AI capabilities built in, gives you an edge that you've got to have in the modern world. It's not even open for debate.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I feel like you're sneaking around it here, Shane, but maybe we should just give a little sneak peek. We have demoed it to some folks, but Keeper, of course, has a really exciting new AI solution that's coming out, and it's agentic. So it's not only looking for those very small little blips, but then actually taking action on that with the ability to terminate sessions, with, very, very tightly controlled customization by the administrator. Really exciting stuff that we're coming out with. Do you want to touch on that a little
Well,
bit? I mean,
I
it's
do, because it's
interesting. The
actually
things, yeah.
when I was leaving, getting ready, when I was considering leaving federal government, anyone knows me knows how much I love public sector and loved working in government forever. And then so leaving there was a big decision for me. And part of the reason I left is because of the work that Keeper is doing, and especially advancing this exact thing. For me as a CISO, AI, especially generative AI, is just scary as all get out. But at the same time, it offers CISOs a true opportunity for doing force multiplying with existing staff. In other words, we're never, ever, ever going to be given all of the people that we need, or all the money that we need. So a lot of times you're making risk-based decisions on what you have. Well, now comes generative AI. It can operate and do things that, a lot of your analysts do now. And it allows you to take your analysts out of that loop and then kind of use them in very key locations within the kind of, putting the human in the loop, they like to say. I think the thing that Keeper AI is really interested, for me anyway, the thing that fascinates me the most, within privileged access, one of the things that it's a requirement for a lot of the compliance frameworks is that you do session recording. So in other words, if you're a privileged user and you're accessing an asset, a server, whatever it is, as soon as you start it up, it's going to start recording. It's like a video, basically. Well, that's great if you have like one administrator, but if you're an enterprise, and you have 1,000 administrators, you are never, ever, ever going to look and review any of those sessions unless you're doing an investigation. So yeah, it's a great idea to have it, but does it really add value to your security program? No, it really doesn't, until something bad happens. Then you can go back and say, oh, look, that's when it happened, but we didn't know about it. What Keeper AI now offers is the ability to actually watch the videos. And that is a game changer for me, because there are things and I go back to SolarWinds again, there are things that if we had had session recording in place, we would have been able to pick up on the nuances and the changes in behavioral aspects of what the attackers were doing versus what the real world administrator would have been doing. We didn't get it in the logs, but we would have seen it through the videos. That's a very promising future. And if you're a CISO, you should perk up on that, because that's going to plug a gap in your overall enterprise that's currently, if you're doing session recording, you're just, throwing a lot of money out the window, storing all the video. You're really not doing a whole lot with it. Now comes along things like Keeper AI, and you're like, well, wait a second, this is something that actually is going to add value now. It's going to be part of my cybersecurity program, as opposed to something I just do because it's a compliance factor.
Yeah, great point. Really, really excited for that announcement. It's coming up next week, but glad we could do a little sneak peek of it today. So I want to talk about like the word in cybersecurity in the government. It's zero trust. We hear it all the time. I guess it's two words when you think about it. But, we're not going to be technical here. So many starts, stops. I mean, it's kind of taken hold, but still has problems. Implementation so patchy. It's one of those things that everyone wants. Everyone feels like I know I need it, but like, how do I really effectively implement zero trust at my organization? So, uh, talk to me a little bit about how important is it for these organizations to implement zero trust principles? And then after you answer that kind of two-part question here, I want you to touch on zero knowledge as well, because that's something that doesn't get talked about as much. Equally fascinating, and in my opinion, equally important. So let's start with zero trust.
So first of all, let's all be honest here. Zero trust is not the best descriptive term for what we're talking about. And if you're really, really being honest, zero trust is just cyber hygiene. It is good cyber hygiene. It's been around for a very long time. We've all known about it. We all knew we needed to do good identity management. We all knew we needed to do asset management. We all knew we needed to do microsegmentation. We've all known this stuff. This has been around for a while. Now they've taken the zero trust term and kind of dumped everything in there and made it brand new and shiny. The reality is that, if you're a CISO and or a cybersecurity professional, you know what you need to do from a security perspective that needs to get done. And it aligns to the zero trust model. In terms of, what that really means, though, is what zero trust is. The reason the term kind of bothers me a little bit is that it implies something that it's not. they always say, oh, you don't trust anything. Well, it's not exactly how it works. Really, what you're talking about is you're talking about transactional monitoring. You're talking about taking the ability to see what's going on in your enterprise and pushing it as far down into the organization as you can. The reason, like, for example, microsegmentation is so important is you need to understand the traffic going between the different segments of your environment and understand when the traffic doesn't align to what it should be doing. But you're also talking billions of transactions in some cases, per second. And so having a zero trust model is really all about the data at that level. Along comes PAM, and PAM, again, it's all about that transactional level access, meaning what monitoring and being able to alert and control that. This is where PAM provides real value and real power, because now, it goes beyond just sort of user monitoring. A lot of us will have some level of user monitoring. When you're talking PAM, you're actually monitoring the actual use of those credentials. And a lot of these individuals, especially in some bigger enterprises, some of them are going to have near God rights to your organization. They're pretty much the last people you want. A lot of times they're very trusted individuals, but that doesn't mean they can't be compromised. And so having a PAM solution that is based on zero trust principles, meaning it is down to the transaction level, it has the capability to stop things in flight before they become a problem. In other words, it's proactive in nature. It is really the next big step. If you are in cloud, especially, and you don't have this, my recommendation is run, don't walk to get your PAM solution implemented. Cloud and zero trust go hand in hand. And in fact, you really can't do zero trust without cloud. Doing it on-prem is messy, to say the least. But and then now the second piece to that, of course, is this zero knowledge concept. And you're right, it isn't talked about a lot. From my, if I was sitting in the public sector still, my big concern, the one thing I always ask vendors is, like, what are you doing with my data? I want to know what you're doing with it. Like, what can you see? What you by engaging and utilizing any SaaS product out there or any cloud solution, you're incurring risk automatically. The idea is that you balance that against the risk that it reduces. Well, if you have a product that can do zero knowledge, which means they can't see your data either, well, now you've actually removed that risk. In other words, and I'm going to pick on Keeper here. What Keeper does is they actually encrypt at the client level. So all the data that we would have associated with any tenant, we can't see it. It's just white noise to us. Now we're going to store it and back it up and do all this great, but we're backing up white noise as far as we're concerned. That's a huge value add. Very tricky stuff to do. It was actually one of the big selling points for me when I was interviewing with Keeper. Because that was the first question I asked. I'm like, you guys are a PAM provider and you're going to be storing PAM information for all these different organizations. You are like the biggest target on the planet. And they're like, well, yeah, they can target us, but they could, even if they got a hold of somehow some weird miracle happened, they're able to get a hold of the information, they're just going to get nothing. And that zero knowledge, that's that kind of, whenever you talk about reducing risk, that takes the risk away. I mean, it basically gets rid of it. You still have a dependency on a service, but that's a different type of risk in terms of operational premise. So, zero knowledge is a critical piece. I would never, it's hard to say it's part of zero trust. People tried to say that. I kind of think it's on the outside. I think it's a risk reduction measure. But to me, it's one of those things that you should be asking of every vendor you operate with, not just your PAM solution.
Yeah. I was at a conference and had a journalist ask me, this sounds amazing. Why doesn't every vendor do this? And I said, I don't know. They probably should.
And some do. I mean, like the AWSs of the world, that's actually how they prefer to do things. You don't have to do it that way, but they would rather you do it that way. They don't want to know what your data is. They don't want to be responsible for it. We don't want to be responsible for your data. We want you to be responsible for it. We're going to provide you the tools and the assets and the capabilities, and you manage your data. And that's what it's all about.
Absolutely. So looking at PAM tools, you have kind of the old school ones, real, started on premises. Maybe they're moving to the cloud a bit. You've got the newer cloud native, cloud first PAM solutions. Sometimes you have both, and you get these organizations that might have multiple PAM tools in their tool belt. I want to get your thoughts on that.
Well, when I first started building ICAM for USCIS, I was the CISO and I owned ICAM, which is odd in government, but I did. And we wanted to centralize and kind of bring it all under one umbrella. At that time, I think we had 13 different types of PAM products running around. And
Okay, so not one or
very,
two, 13.
oh, 13.
Woo!
It was 30. That's actually what I remember. It may have been more. I think I stopped counting at 13. And some of them were fairly modern and ish. I mean, they were, like an AD type directory services or, but then there was also some very bespoke, sort of very customized things that were built probably in COBOL, to support some IBM, circa 1970s IBM mainframe. And, it's running its own little thing and doing its own thing. And nobody really understands it. They don't want to touch it because it's so old that nobody understands what it does. And there's no documentation on it. So if you touch it, it's going to fall over and die and then we're in trouble. And it was that sort of scenario. And that is a very, very common thing for a lot of the public sector, because what they do, and USCIS was just as guilty of this as others, is that, we would add a new product to support a specific mission set. And then we would build around it all the things that supported that application line. We'd build in all the identity access pieces. We would build in all the, how we manage privileged access, if we even managed it. And that sort of stuff. That's why you end up with all these different tools, and none of them talk to each other. The user base is completely different. They don't even rely on a single user identity. So it's kind of a hot mess. So, what's critical about this is centralization of your PAM functions. Now, most of the time I would tell you, hey, be very leery of centralization on anything, because, it opens up a can of worms in other ways, but not when it comes to identity. Identity is the thing you have to get right. If you fail at identity, you haven't just lost a battle, you've lost the entire war. And PAM even more so, because now you're talking about very privileged access to your environment. If they can compromise a privileged account, then that you've made life very easy for any attacker. And so PAM as a centralized, all-encompassing feature set, it's going to do several things. One, it's going to reduce the overall workload. When you're only supporting a single entity, especially if it's a SaaS product, you can do that with a much smaller group of people to do it. Instead of having 5 different people doing 18 different products, now you can have 2 people very focused, very specific to a product. And it allows you to manage your entire enterprise with a much smaller footprint. 2, it's going to give you the visibility and access that you need to actually manage the risk associated with privileged access. Privileged access is a necessary evil. It'd be great if we could just say, oh, no privileged access for anyone. That would solve so many problems, but that's not reality. We need it. It has to be in place. Let's just manage it correctly, and let's do that from a very centralized, kind of single pane of glass perspective. And finally, it's also going to have some other kind of side benefits that are going to come along, that things that allow integrations and data intelligence and other aspects that are going to help you feed the larger pieces of your enterprise. It's sort of like these downstream effects that people don't think about that are really critical as well. I wish I could think of an example, but the examples I have are too specific. But there is these sort of like multiplier things that when you start centralizing key aspects of your identity, like secrets management, like PAM, you're going to reap the rewards that come from that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And Keeper really has taken a platform-based approach to our PAM product. And you get that single pane of glass. You have all of those integrations. So, here we always say we don't expect you to change your tech stack at all. You don't have to. We will work within your existing tech stack, but provide you with that visibility, control, and reporting across everything. I don't think we've actually gone through the entire platform, so now might be a good time to do that. Can you talk through a little bit? We touched on password management, we touched on secrets management, but we really haven't gotten into connections management and some of the other aspects of the platform. Would you mind kind of running through that for everyone?
Sure, we can do that. So PAM when you start talking about PAM, a lot of people just think, oh, it's rights management. It's far more than that. Because if you have a really solid PAM product, it's going to do several things. One, yes, it's going to help you centrally manage your access rights, and control those so that you're not over privileging and not under privileging, actually, which is equally as important, by the way. It also allows you a very centralized location to do exceptions to the rules. And know about those exceptions up front. So often, all of us have faced a crisis or another, whether it's a new deployment going sideways, maybe it's a hardware failure, network failure, application failure, and suddenly everyone's like, oh, I need access to this, and this, and just to give me everything, and we'll figure it out later. Well, that sounds great in the emergency, but then you have to go back and undo all that, and it creates its own set of risk problems. So being able to like do those exceptions and have them in-house and understand where they are and put limits on them and then know where they are and then go back and fix them like you should, it just adds so much value and so much, it makes your life so much easier. On top of that, the connections piece is really important here. You know, what privileged access is all about the connections. In other words, they are connecting to your enterprise at endpoints that are in some cases privileged, in other cases they're not, but they are those pieces. That connection is really important. Well, you don't want that done over some unsecured protocol or port. You want that done through an encrypted channel. You want to be able to have session monitoring. You want to have all the rules and all the monitoring and controls in place, so that if you do have an insider threat, or you do have somebody who's maybe junior and doesn't understand what they're doing and makes mistakes, and you want to be able to know what's going on ahead of schedule. In other words, you want to be proactive about what you're doing. And I think the last piece is really sort of the management of your actual privileged enterprise. You being able to manage it at scale. And it truly doesn't matter how big your organization is. You could have 500,000 endpoints, or you could have 5,000 endpoints. You still have to manage that, and being able to do that from a centralized platform, and then being able to apply applicable rules and policies across your entire enterprise, literally with a click of a mouse, and then seeing the downstream impacts of that and seeing what you can get from that, what you learn. Huge benefits, just tremendous benefits.
So I still haven't recovered from you saying that you had 13 PAM products at once.
Actually, we were pretty good. There were others that are, and I won't dime them out. They know who they are.
We won't name names,
but you know.
Very stressful just thinking about that. Government can be complex, and reducing risk in that type of environment is a challenge. What are some of the just most effective ways to do that? Let's talk a little bit about role-based access controls, least privilege. How do you go about reducing risk?
So reducing, when you talk about reducing risk, one, you have to understand the risk. That actually is sometimes far more of a challenge than people like to think about. Which actually is sometimes where your compliance frameworks come in, because they actually do help identify that. And I don't know any compliance framework out there that doesn't actually mandate or at least require some type of role-based access in place. And role-based access is just as it implies. It is access based on a role. What you then can do is assign those roles based on job duties, based on function, based on need. And it allows you to control things. That's how you do enterprise role management, right? Because you don't want to go in, if you have 1,000 administrators, you don't want to have to go in on each one and go, okay, this person, he needs this, this, and this. Oh, but he doesn't need this. And oh, this person, no. You want to be able to say, oh, you're an administrator for this application or this system or this part of the network. Here, that's a role. Here's what's associated with that role and the access rights you there. That way, once you have that in place, if say this person, they're assigned to manage your backend infrastructure in your network, and that's the role they're assigned, and they have access rights accordingly. Well, if somebody compromises that role and suddenly they're popping up in your application servers or they're hitting your front end, that's not normal. That's outside their role. That's an easy alert. It's an easy stop, and PAM is going to stop that long before you could even click on the alert that just came in. So roles then allow that level of visibility. It's very finite. It can be very finite. It can be very broad, but it gives you the ability to control it. I know with Keeper PAM, that's what you get. You can go in and define these roles for yourself. You can change them, update them, and alter them at will. And it gives you such an ability to control the level of access that your administrators have, that you just don't get that when you have a very decentralized or very broken process. The second part to that, second part of that is that once you have your PAM solution in place and you've got the centralization, you've got role-based access. Well, the next stage in that is that you've got to be able to not only just manage the roles, but you've also be able to manage all the data coming from that and streaming into whether it's a SIM, whether you're leveraging Keeper, whatever you're doing, you have to be able to manage all that data. Well, you're not going to even understand the data without the roles in place. Therefore, it kind of defines itself downstream. And so you really need to make sure that as you're setting these environments up, and you're really kind of think that through. I know when we first started setting up some of the role-based access that we did, we weren't very successful at it because we didn't take the time to really understand the roles as they were and kind of define them accordingly. And what we ended up doing is to go back and fix a lot of things. It took a lot of time. make sure you spend some time doing that and really think it through and really consider, what is this role? And then the last consideration associated with that is, of course, this concept of least privilege. Least privilege is a term that CISOs love and administrators hate, because what it really is all about is what is it you need to do, and what's the least amount of privileges I can give you to do it. They don't like that. Administrators, they're all sort of the same. They're trying to work tickets. They're trying to do their jobs. They don't want to have to like log in, log out, log into this, or go ask, Bob next door because he's got the right kind of rights to do this, or they just don't want it. They want God rights to your enterprise. No, it'll be fine. It'll be good. No, it really won't. By defining your least privileged access rights and then baking that into those roles, what that really is going to give you the ability to do is stop an attack before it even starts. And it gives you it's like a very proactive way of making sure that even if a threat actor compromises a session or compromises a token, they're going to have a very limited ability to operate within your organization, because those roles and that limited access is going to prevent them from doing quite a few things. And not only that, it's going to pop alerts everywhere they go. And so, we always say that under a zero trust in concept, you assume breach. And I love that concept. CISOs are paranoid folks. That's what we get paid to be. But at the same time, it's good to be paranoid, but you got to be able to do something about that. So being paranoid is wonderful, but let's be paranoid in a very proactive way. And by having least privilege, role-based access and built in, and then making sure you're managing all that data streaming coming out the other side for the transactional monitoring, now you're setting yourself up for success. And really, long-term, from a threat actors, they're going to compromise your environment, assume breach. Now we can kind of limit the dwell time. We can limit how long they get to spend there. You're never going to stop them outright. If you're going up against, I've gone up against many nation state threat actors in the past. And I will say, they're well resourced. They're driven by an ideology. They're not there to still, PII and go take out mortgages in everyone's name. They're there for intelligence gathering reasons or very specific nation state driven reasons. They're very, very, very difficult, attack. They're very, very difficult, not enemies. They're very difficult to defend against and to protect yourself against. And even during SolarWinds, honestly, you probably could have been staring at the computer and watching them work, and you probably wouldn't have known it. They were that good and that detailed. That's why PAM is so critical. We didn't have a PAM solution in place when SolarWinds hit. We did, but it didn't have the level of detail that we needed. It didn't have what Keeper offers. We just weren't there. We spent the next 3 years building that, but it really was a necessary piece. And we always knew we couldn't have stopped that particular threat actor from getting in, but we could have ended the dwell time. We could have cut that time they spent in our enterprise down to a very small time frame. I mean, that's what it's all about. That's really what you're trying to do. You're not going to stop them completely, but if I can limit the amount of time they get to spend in my enterprise to less than a day, I'm winning.
Absolutely. Reduce the blast radius. I mean, that's really what it's all about. And with the role conversation, it's interesting too, because we know that attackers aren't always going after IT admins. Sometimes they're coming in through finance or HR. I mean, there's a ton of information, a ton of different ways that they can get in, they can dwell, and they can elevate their access. A solution like Keeper is uniquely beneficial for really ensuring coverage across the organization and not just in IT.
Correct. And you're right. I should probably make that more clear, because privileged access occurs at all aspects of your enterprise. It's just not. And in government, it's funny, when I came to Keeper, that was one of the things I wasn't quite ready for. In government, they're very funny about it. Oh, only IT people can be privileged access, privileged users. That's it. No others. But, in the real world, the private sector, we have to operate and we have to allow the sales teams to do certain things. We have to allow the HR folks to be able to do certain things, and they're going to have very privileged access to systems and aspects of your enterprise. You need to be able to manage those roles just as equally as much as you need to be able to manage your system administrators and your database administrators.
Absolutely. Okay, let's do one more question, and then we'll see if the audience has any questions. If you do, feel free to throw them in the chat. We can take a look, see if there's any good ones to answer for the group. But before we get to that, let's do one more for you. I'm kind of curious about future trends. I have one that jumps to mind for me immediately, and that's quantum. So you can jump on that one, or if there's another one that you want to talk about, anything that's kind of on your radar that you think are going to be critical in this space.
So yeah, lots, right? Um, when I first started in cyber, cybersecurity, we had data centers, and you as an administrator could reach out and hug your servers and your network gear at any point in your existence. The bricks and mortar offered a layer of security that that we just don't have anymore. Like cloud has taken that away, in a good way, by the way, not in a bad way. So now, as soon as cloud hit and it started accelerating that process, and then of course all the technologies that went with that, we really start seeing some interesting things happening in terms of capabilities. And the threat actors picked up on it just as quickly. Leveraging cloud to do attacks is a thing now. Well, what's next? Where are we heading with this? So, cloud also enabled this lovely new technology called generative AI. Like I said, generative AI is it is the future of IT. If you don't realize that, then, have some articles and books you should probably read. But at the same time, it's a unique technology because it's not like anything we've ever dealt with or seen. It is at once a user, an infrastructure, and a system. And you have all the risks associated with all three running at once. Not only that, the risks are affected by the actors involved, whether you're talking about an administrator, an external resource, or an external source, external users. And it's also affected by time, meaning where in a process of development and use that those risks occur. Organizations like MIT have put together a risk registry for generative AI, and MIT is one of the best ones I've seen so far. And they've identified over 1,600 unique risks associated with generative AI. And more importantly, if you take like a NIST framework, or you take ISO or any of them, and you apply and you remove all the known risks, you're still left with about 1,000 risks that aren't dealt with by those frameworks at all. Which means you could certify something to operate and still have 1,000 different risks out running around that you haven't even accounted for and don't even know about, and they're just basically there, and you're not even seeing them or worried about them. That's a scary thing. The flip side of generative AI, though, is that ability to add value at very key levels in your organization. One of the things that I've always been worried about new technologies is it's like we have something new, and it's like it's looking for a place to fit in, or looking for a mission. Generative AI is one of those things that there are some very clear wins when it comes to that. We've already talked about Keeper AI and what it can do as a force multiplier for organizations. If you're a good CISO, you're going to be looking at generative AI as that force multiplier. Where can I plug this thing in? Where can I use it? Can I use it for SIM? Can I use it for SOAR? How can I make generative AI part of my security team? And not to mention, in order to defend against generative AI, you're going to have to use generative AI. We have yet to see a true adversarial attack or adversarial AI attack. At least, well, there's been a few, but not like what we think is coming. But at the same time, it is coming at some point in our existence, and probably a lot sooner than we all care to think about. We're going to have to defend against an adversarial AI. They're never going to sleep. They're going to be unbelievably smart and capable and do things against our enterprises that we ourselves are probably not thinking about yet. And so we're going to need something on our side to help defend against that.
Yeah, that's such an interesting concept, because we think about how adversaries are using AI right now all the time. We talk about, more believable phishing emails, sending scams and launching attacks at scale. But you're talking about the actual adversary being AI.
Oh yeah, it is that step, and we know for a fact that some of the bigger nation states are working on that kind of very concept as we speak, and they don't have the same misgivings about generative AI that a lot of us do.
Yeah.
Anybody in the security field is very worried about it because it's very data hungry. It wants data. It's going to find data, and it'll do everything it can to get to the data. That worries of us. We don't like that. We want to be able to control. We're going to have to rethink how we do things. Honestly, for me, the future of PAM is going to be wrapped around how do we apply role-based access to generative AI. And how are we going to, basically corral it without corralling it? And, PAM is going to play a critical role in that.
Yeah. Well, thank you for
Since you
freaking
did
us
mention
all out
postponement
by the end
questions,
of this. We're all
we
just going to be terrified now of these AI adversaries, and we have that lovely note to leave on. But no, this has been a great conversation, Shane. Can't tell you how much we appreciate it. Let me pop in and see if we got any questions or anyone in the chat who wanted to get some additional insight. But I know you have provided such great insight to all of us today. So not seeing anything that sticks out. I will send it over to Kim to do a quick wrap up for us, and then we'll say goodbye.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you, Anne. Thank you, Shane, for that great presentation. Thank you to our audience for joining today. We'll leave the questions open for just a moment, just in case there's any last minute ones. But if you're interested in learning more about Keeper Pam or anything you heard on the webinar today, we do encourage you to visit our website, keepersecurity.com. If you're a current Keeper customer and want to know more about Keeper Pam, we encourage you to reach out to your customer success manager. If you're not yet a Keeper customer, again, the website has tons of great information for you. And if you're ready for a personalized demo, you can reach out via the website as well. So thanks again, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.